But let's begin in Washington with a significant decision from the U.S. Supreme Court that Donald Trump is calling a monumental win. The court backed Trump's efforts to curtail lower court rulings that have hampered his agenda, and that includes injunctions that blocked his controversial order to end birthright citizenship in the United States. The U.S. president spoke about the ruling at the White House just a short while ago.
He was elected on a historic mandate, but in recent months we've seen a handful of radical left judges effectively try to overrule the rightful powers of the president to stop the American people from getting the policies that they voted for in record numbers. It was a grave threat to democracy, frankly, and instead of merely ruling on the immediate cases before them, these judges have attempted to dictate the law for the entire nation.
CBC Sam Sampson is outside the U.S. Supreme Court in Washington and joins us now live. So, Sam, take us through today's ruling.
Yes, well, it was a 6-3 vote. And essentially, overall, this ruling says that injunctions at lower levels of court in the United States cannot be in effect for everybody in the country. So they can protect specific plaintiffs. So in this case, the organizations that were plaintiffs, as well as some pregnant women who are not documented Americans. But the lower courts cannot protect all Americans all at once from any overarching rule. And in this case, it's an executive order from U.S. President Donald Trump. Essentially, if you boil it down, a district judge cannot block an executive order nationwide. As I mentioned, the vote was 6-3, so obviously not every judge on the Supreme Court agreed. Let's take a look at those specific arguments. So this one first is from a judge who voted to back Trump, stating federal courts do not exercise general oversight of the executive branch. They resolve cases and controversies consistent with the authority Congress has given them. Here's the important part. When a court concludes that the executive branch has acted unlawfully, the answer is not for the court to exceed its power to. So essentially arguing these lower courts overstepped their rule. And even if they don't agree with the executive order, they cannot overstep their rule in order to block it. So now let's take a look at an opinion from a judge who did not agree with this and did not want to support the Trump administration. This quote says, "The zone of lawlessness the majority has now authorized will disproportionately impact the poor, the uneducated, and the unpopular." It goes on to say those who can't lawyer up will basically be the ones the most affected. This is yet another crack in the foundation of the rule of law, which requires equality and justice in its application. So to translate that, the judges who did not agree with this decision are worried about the snowball effect. What will this mean in terms of unchecked presidential power? Here's what the Trump administration thinks of the ruling.
These injunctions have blocked our policies from tariffs to military readiness to immigration to foreign affairs, fraud, abuse, and many other issues. The judges have tried to seize the executive branch's power, and they cannot do that. No longer. No longer.
So clearly, the Trump administration is very pleased with this ruling. Another point that the judges who dissented this decision, who didn't agree, were really concerned about the constitutionality of the executive order itself. But the judges who approved this decision, this ruling, were in favor of it, said, look, that's not what we're arguing here. We're not arguing whether or not this executive order is a good idea. We are arguing the powers of the lower courts. And what we're seeing today is that, no, the lower courts cannot block a presidential executive order nationwide.
So what exactly does this mean for Trump's agenda, and what happens next?
Well, if we back up to that constitutional aspect of it, those who are saying this is not what the Constitution is saying, the Constitution clearly says, according to those opposed to this, that anybody born in the United States is considered an American, birthright citizenship. So they could take that idea to court and challenge the constitutionality of this specific executive order. Also, those who are maybe at risk of not having their citizenship recognized, should this executive order come into play, they can bring up their own lawsuits individually, which would create a landslide and maybe even a lot of backlog in terms of the American court system. For Trump, he said it, you heard it there, he said this was a great, should this have not gone into effect, it was a grave outcome for Americans. And he did also say that this opens up a lot of territory. This is not the only Supreme Court decision that we're hearing about today. And so essentially now the president can move forward and enact those executive orders, including the birthright citizenship challenge and maybe the change of meaning in that. Here's what the president said just moments ago.
Some of the cases we're talking about would be ending birthright citizenship, which now comes to the fore. That was meant for the babies of slaves. It wasn't meant for people trying to scam the system and come into the country on a vacation. This was, in fact, it was the same date, the exact same date, the end of the Civil War. It was meant for the babies of slaves, and it's so clean and so obvious.
So clearly that is the president's interpretation of what the Constitution says in terms of birthright citizenship. He was not specific on what his administration will do to enact this. It's not like that executive order comes into play immediately, but now they have much more power than they did before the Supreme Court ruling came down just earlier today.
CBC Sam Sampson in Washington. Thank you, Sam. All right, let's stick with this story and try to unpack it a bit more. And for that, we've invited to the show Rosanna Berardi. She's the managing partner of Berardi Immigration Law, and she's joining us from Buffalo, New York. Ms. Berardi, thank you so much for making time for us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, our colleague Sam was trying to break down the decision and explain it to us, but I have to be so transparent with you. Despite all of that clarification, it still remains quite unclear what exactly today's ruling means for this administration. Help us understand what has changed.
So this is a really complicated decision to explain. I spent a lot of time reviewing it this morning, and really big picture zoom out. We've seen this administration aggressively sign executive order after executive order, right? First day of the administration, Trump had the giant pen, was just signing things away. Well, what happened to most of those orders? People sued and said, these are unconstitutional, we don't like them. All those lawsuits went up to federal courts. And the court judges said, we don't like these either, therefore they no longer exist. What the Supreme Court decided on today was, can the federal courts actually do that? They clearly stated, we're not talking about birthright citizenship. That's not the issue here. That was the packaging around the request for the court to hear. But basically, today's decision says the federal courts, which are lower than the president and his administration, cannot have this sweeping power to just stop everything. A judge in Missouri or a judge in Texas that doesn't like one of these executive orders can't freeze it for the whole country, which is a huge win for the Trump administration, because this is an administration that loves executive orders, and they've been slammed and stopped, 25 of them so far. So this is going to give them a wide range of authority and ability, and they won't be strangled by the lower courts.
So, Ms. Berardi, help me understand. So the executive orders could be blocked in the state of Texas, but still be applicable in other states?
Yes. And herein lies the huge problem, right? So we have this tension between, okay, is it really fair for one judge to make a decision for the whole country? And if that answer is it's not fair, then what do we do in a country of our size with 330 million people? It's really difficult. And, federal law is supposed to apply to anyone in the United States. But now the court's interpretation is saying this is overreaching. This is too broad. And my concern is we're going to see a patchwork of rulings where if you're in one state, it means one thing. If you're in another, it means another, which this is a tough issue. But the Trump administration is running a victory lap today because they are like, yes, we are not going to be strong-armed by the federal courts any longer.
And I completely recognize your point that this isn't about birthright citizenship, but that is the umbrella under which it was being presented, certainly to the courts and to the public, how we've been reporting it. So if we continue with that theme, if you're someone, okay, let's say I'm in New York and I have a child. I'm not an American citizen, but I have a child. 6 months ago, that child would have been born in the United States and automatically become an American citizen. Now, under the executive order, and if it's not challenged by the New York courts, does that mean that child is not a citizen now?
Yes, that can be. The only caveat is 22 states filed lawsuits saying that they thought this was an unconstitutional executive order. I am not 1,000% certain if New York State was one of them. But
Right.
if one of those states of the 22, it can be interpreted that that child born is not an American citizen, which is a huge departure from what the U.S. Constitution says. So, we're probably going to see a patchwork of this until the ultimate issue gets decided. And remember, it takes a lot for a case to hit the Supreme Court. And this one was all about procedure. This was not about citizenship. This was all about procedure. And it has us legal experts scratching our heads because it's very, very hard to explain. And we're not sure of the impact on it just yet.
What are you hearing from your clientele that might be quite concerned about this?
Yeah, people are calling and saying, what does this mean? Is it on? Is it off? Did Trump win? Did he lose? And the answer is, well, it's sort of in the middle. The Supreme Court punted the ultimate issue. And they also gave the lower courts 30 days. So until July 27th, I would argue that everything that has been happening can continue to happen, but we will see what happens. And just know today was the last day of the U.S. Supreme Court's term. Mm-hmm. They will not be back on the court until October. So they left this one for the last minute along with 4 or 5 other decisions, but they will not reconvene until October. So we're going to see this summer how this plays out, what's going to happen. But big picture, zoom out. The Trump administration won on this because at every turn, at every issuance of an executive order, they aren't going to be stymied. And that was the big takeaway today and why the administration is calling this a win.
Okay. Rosanna Berardi, thank you so much for your insights today.
My pleasure.